Tec Sounds presents EduTrends.
Hi, I'm José Pepe Escamilla. I am Associate Director of the Institute for the Future of Education. Today's guests are Robert Sparrow, Professor of Philosophy, and Jean Flenady, Lecturer in Philosophy at Monash University. We'll explore why they believe the growing enthusiasm for AI in higher education might be leading us in the wrong direction, and what we should do instead. It's a pleasure to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes. Well, so I recently came across your report, Bullshit Universities, and it immediately caught my attention. But before we dive into the ideas of that article, I'd love to start with a personal question to get you to know better. Robert, I would like to ask you first, and then after that, Jean, what inspired you to pursue a career in education?
I love teaching. I love philosophy, which is my discipline, but I love the way that when you teach people philosophy, you can really change their lives. So I've had students tell me that my teaching changed their lives. And I love the way it forces you to refine your own understanding of what it is that you're teaching and to keep learning.
Thank you. Jean, you want to go?
Oh, very much the same. So, I think about the change that higher education made in my life. So I was from a working class background and, doing an arts degree, just completely over that line. I guess that's a cliche. And I love being able to produce the same sort of, or help to bring about the same sort of mind opening, so to speak, or transformation in my own students.
Yes, very, very interesting. I'm also a first generation in higher education, so I understand that feeling also. So in your article, you use the word bullshit. So I would like to ask you, what do you mean by bullshit, and why have you argued that the outputs of AI are fundamentally meaningless bullshit?
So bullshit is now a technical term in philosophy, following a reasonably famous book by the philosopher Harry Frankfurt. And in that book on bullshit, Frankfurt pointed out that while we're familiar with people who tell the truth and we're familiar with people who lie, there's another category, the bullshitter. And the distinctive feature of bullshitters and of bullshit is that the bullshitter doesn't care about the truth at all. It's not trying to communicate, not motivated by the truth, either to communicate it, as is the truth teller, or to obscure it, as is the liar. The bullshitter doesn't care about the truth at all and is only trying to generate a certain response in the audience. Traditionally, to get a rise, to sort of get up people's noses or to annoy people, but it might be just to convince them of something. And the bullshitter will just do what's required in order to generate that reaction in the audience. And so bullshit is quite corrosive of our practices of speech and our ethics as well, because this is someone who is just taking advantage of other people's tendency to believe what we tell each other. Jean, do you want to do the meaningless?
Yes.
Do you want to do the meaningless bullshit bit?
Yeah. So that there's a further claim there that, to really mean what you say, you have to be committed not just to the further kind of claims that are entailed by what you say, but you also have to be committed to the kind of actions that are entailed by what you say. So the example that, in the background from my paper is the philosophy of Robert Brandom. He's pragmatic inferentialism. The example he always uses, and we often use it, is, well, if you say, to really mean the word fire, you have to know what that entails, right? That it's hot, et cetera, that it can burn you and so on and so forth. But you also have to be capable of fleeing from it. For fire as a word to be meaningful to you, right? You have to be able to follow what's entailed both in words and action by that concept. And it doesn't look like this generation of AI, large language models, are capable of following through or standing behind their words in the way that we would expect of a human agent that really means what they say.
Yeah. So once you've got that analysis of bullshit in hand, you can see that generative AI systems are bullshitters. They don't care about the truth. They don't have access to the world, and they don't care about anything because they're not sentient. They don't have feelings. They don't care about anything at all. So they don't care about the truth, and they are trained by generating a certain response in the audience, by getting people to tick a little thumbs up button or by getting people to respond in a certain way to their outputs. So they're bullshit machines. They produce outputs, but those outputs aren't oriented towards the truth, only oriented towards the audience responding to them in a certain way. They're bullshit, and then they're also meaningless bullshit because the machines cannot, as Jean said, follow through with the actions that you would normally expect if someone made those claims that would require them to do made particular claims, they might be required to do certain things. And the machines can't do that because they're not actors. They're not capable of meaningful utterances. So that makes them very problematic in an educational context. These are machines that don't care about the truth and really don't mean anything that they say.
Mhm. So a very interesting point of view. And based on that meaningless bullshit outputs of the AI, what are the effects of relying too much on AI for work usually done by educators, like in an educational setting in universities, introducing the use of AI to enhance or automate or reduce the time consumed by certain tasks in the teaching learning process, both for professors and students? What's the risk there?
There are all sorts of risks. I mean, most fundamentally, universities are institutions that should be oriented towards the production of knowledge, which is to say, oriented towards the truth. And these machines aren't oriented towards the truth. So if you have one teaching students, for instance, the example that gives is very, very bad, it seems to me. What students are learning from these machines is not what they would learn from a human being saying exactly the same things, because the human being is oriented towards the truth and provides an example of someone who is striving to discover the truth. The machine is just spitting out words, even if they're very same words. The example it provides is very different. I think it's also important to understand here that often when we're teaching students or when we're working with students, even though we have this orientation towards the truth, and we don't want our students to, cheat or plagiarize or be careless with the truth, it's also not the case that we're really, when we're examining our students, we want them to necessarily to give us the right answers. What we want them to do is demonstrate their understanding. And so when I said a philosophy essay, for instance, I am interested in what my students are saying because I am trying to demonstrate my respect. I do respect my students. I'm trying to be involved in a dialogue with them. But at another level, it's not like I'm expecting any particularly profound philosophical insight from them. What I'm hoping is that they will demonstrate what they have learnt. And if they just hit a button, get ChatGPT to write the paper, it might be a better essay, philosophically speaking, but it won't demonstrate that what they have learned. So the students in that instance are not learning the core skills that I'm trying to teach them because they're not practicing the core skills.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So
You-
go ahead, please.
So I agree with what Rob said. I mean, one way to think about it in terms of responsibility. So, because AI, Gen AI is a meaningless bullshitter, it doesn't assume responsibility for what it says. And no one has responsibility to it. I don't have responsibility to Gen AI in the way that I have responsibility to a teacher or I have responsibility to a student, right? So as a teacher, I've got a responsibility to my students to take their work seriously, to think carefully about what they've said and give good feedback. They've got a responsibility to me, right? To take my teaching seriously and to do their best to produce their best work. That kind of relationship of mutual responsibility and mutual entitlement is completely broken down once you insert AI, because no one can be responsible to AI, and AI can't be responsible for itself or for anyone else.
So I understand your point of view. That I'm also concerned of are the students that use AI, are they learning the basic skills of the field of the discipline, or are they bypassing some important cognitive process or whatever that makes them understand the discipline, the field, the way of thinking, no? In particular, in philosophy, language is very important. But we also have to acknowledge that AI is becoming used everywhere. No, I would say outside of education, no? Outside of the universities, and that the students will be faced in their day-to-day work and personal life to AI. So, what will be the recommendation that you would do about using AI in education, in the teaching learning process?
I do worry that these technologies are radically de-skilling. So take the example of reading and writing, which, to be frank, students now don't need to do either of those things. They can get an AI summary of a book and they can get an AI to write their answers for them. But what are they learning when they do that? They're not learning the skills of reading and writing. And as a result of that, there's always that further step where people say, look, they understand the machines aren't responsible for the answers. So they say, well, the student has to take responsibility for the work that they submit. But if the student hasn't read the book and they don't have the skills to read the book, how are they going to check whether or not the AI summary is any good? And if they haven't thought about what they think and mean and what they want to say, how are they going to decide whether the essay that the AI has written for them is a good essay and actually is saying what they mean? So these technologies risk completely undercutting the learning process. And there's a sense in which, again, even if the essay is a good essay, if the student hasn't learned anything by writing it, what is the point in setting that essay? Now, the second part, that idea that students are going to go out into the world and people are going to be using AI, that's true. I'm not convinced that the skill of learning to use AI is anything more than the skill of being able to think critically and the traditional skills that we have been teaching at universities. And if there is if there's some tricks of the trade, if you need to know about how it works, they're all going to change very quickly. And I'm not convinced that there's much to say there. What we need, if we want students who can use AI effectively, we want students who can read and write and think critically. And that will enable them to use AI effectively because they will be able to assess its outputs. But if they don't learn how to do that because they're using AI during the educational process, I simply can't see all the best prompting skills in the world, best technical understandings of how these things work. If you don't have the capacity to evaluate the quality of its outputs, in what sense are you using it effectively? Now, I know Gene has been working on this, so I'm sure he has more to contribute as well.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, I agree with what Rob said. But just in terms of sort of the pragmatics of how we manage student AI use, I think it means secured assessment. I mean, we call a secured assessment, right? So that need not be all of the assessment that a student undertakes in disciplinary subject, but I think, things like structured participation exercises, group work, presentations, group and individual, written exams in class. Perhaps there's an essay where they are entitled to use ChatGPT, but then their interactions with ChatGPT would need to be, you know, itself graded, right? But to make sure that there's critical engagement with ChatGPT, but I'm hesitant about that because as soon as ChatGPT is involved, it seems like the student can offload all of their cognition. So, it means a total kind of redesign of the way I think that we assess students to make sure, again, as to Rob's point, that they're the ones developing these sort of fundamental skills in reading, writing, and critical thinking, which will enable them to be in the workplace, if this happens in future, to be good users of AI and responsible and ethical users of AI in the future. Right? The nightmare scenario is, and if we start marking papers with AI, and this is what really, I think, when Rob and I started talking about this is sort of what blew our minds, is that, okay, students will use AI to write their papers, and then we're going to use AI to mark them. Then it's just two machines talking to one another. Students are paying, a lot of money to get a piece of paper that hasn't built any skills. So it's got to be a total rethinking of the way that we assess and mark student work.
Yeah. So, in my opinion, it's important to think what are the basic skills that all students have to have in order to thrive in a world that will be full of AI. And also, what some of them are like a basic skills as critical thinking, as Robert said before. No, and we have to make sure that we are developing those skills, but at the same time, they are able to use these tools that will be part of their field. I'm not very familiar with philosophy. I understand there is a lot. Language has a lot to do on that, but maybe in other fields there are tools that are very specialized. Now, I don't know if you're a medical doctor, you can upload in an AI specialized tool something related to your genome and biomarkers, etc., to screen some kind of illness or whatever. And you have to be able also to make a good use of these, because maybe it can also give some results that are not accurate. Now, that what happens with ChatGPT, that maybe is 70% of the time accurate and 30% not. No, I'm guessing. It's just an educated guess by being a user. So I think there are some fields or some disciplines where you will have to use AI in your field, but you also have to be take charge of the consequences of that somehow. No, and yeah.
But so
So
that's a really that's a really useful example, Pepe, in a way, because the question is, you say that the medico has to check the results, has to make an assessment, use the AI tool. Maybe there's some skills there, though. Again, if people have to, software is not necessarily well designed if people have to be, trained extensively to use it. But so people use this software and then they have to check its results. How do they do that if they don't have the basic understanding of the science, if they don't actually have the skill set to do it themselves? But where are they going to learn that if they are regularly using AI to do that? Now, one issue here is, of course, we know that people tend to overtrust these machines. There's a phenomenon called automation bias, whereby people cease paying attention to systems that mostly do a good job, and so they don't notice when they fail. This is a real problem for, say, driverless vehicles. They work most of the time, but then when they fail, they need a driver to take control, and the driver's not paying attention because the machine has been doing the work, and that's a catastrophic failure. So it's actually really hard for people to keep paying attention to a task if they're not actually actively involved in that. But there's also the huge difference between the educational context. Okay, with the educational context, the medical student needs to be learning the skills required to check the outputs of AI, which is to say they need to be learning the medicine. They need to be learning the genetics in that case. And then they can go out in the world, and if there's an AI tool that does some of that work, if they know the science, they know the genetics, they'll be able to use it safely. But if the process of education is, "Oh, here's how you use these tools," and not, "Here's how you do the task yourself," they simply won't be able, to check. It's also clear that some of the things that people are proposing for these machines are things that human beings simply cannot check. So I was at a conference the other day, and someone was spruiking a machine that would read the entire medical literature for you and tell you whether the results that were relevant to your patient or to your query. Okay, and that sounds fantastic. Every gene, every protein related to this particular condition. And then you think, well, how do you check that? What they said to me is doctors don't have time to do this, and there's too much published, so a machine will do it. But if that's true, how is the human being going to check that? And then if the machine isn't reliable, there's a real risk there. So people need to think, what skill set do you need to check the output of these devices? And are we training students? Are we teaching students the skills? And I don't think those skills are skills in using AI. I think they are skills in the tasks that AI is doing.
So oh no, it comes back to this fundamental, and Rob's written extensively on this. Machines can't assume responsibility. So in these high stakes scenarios where it's a doctor diagnosing a disease, or it's a lawyer preparing a case, right, where people's lives or livelihoods are on the line. If something goes wrong, you can't hold the machine accountable. You can't punish a machine. That just doesn't make any sense. So the blame for the responsibility has to stop with the human user. So how do we prepare lawyers and doctors and engineers, right, to assume that responsibility, right? So they've got the skills so that when they put what the AI output into effect, right, that they can stand behind that they can be the ones that can meaningfully assume responsibility. And that's a real problem when we can't understand the way that the AI has come to the decision or produce the output of it. It's the black box problem.
Mhm. Yes. No, I agree with what you said, and that's why I think that the discussion of using AI in education should be also around. I think it's inevitable, but I think also it's not true that anything goes. So we have to say what are the things that we need of students to learn to be good users of AI in the future, and what are the things that we teach right now that has to be prioritized. Maybe there are some stuff that will not be so prioritized, like in math, mechanical arithmetic is no longer something of a priority because we have calculators, and then we have simulators, and then we have AI that can do models that are more sophisticated of what can do with an abacus or in hand, no? Let's say. So there are some things that we recognize that you still need to know how they work, but you use more advanced tools. So what will be the uses of AI that are like that will deprioritize some things that we learn now? And what are the new things that we have to emphasize, like the ethical use of AIs, that you have to take the responsibility of that? No, is if Google Maps tell you to go in one direction and you see clearly that it's not that way, you will not go. But maybe it's very clear that you cannot go because there's something wrong. The problem with our result from AI is it looks authentic. No, it's made to be to the language and the way it is built. So I would also like to ask you about the distinction that you make in your article about learning that and learning how and why this is important.
In a way, we've already been talking about that, because we think that, so when one in education, one needs to learn some content. You need to learn that, I don't know, Plato had a theory of the forms and a kind of analogy of the story about a cave or whatever it is. You need to know the periodic table, but you also need to learn skills. You need to learn how to make a philosophical argument, for instance, or you need to know how to do a titration, or you know, build a bridge. There are skills, and the question here is, the machines are very, in a sense, learning that has become less important as the machines are much more capable of just providing that information to us. That idea of the world at your fingertips, which was essentially the promise of the internet, but before that, libraries. That means that it's less important to learn that, but it's vitally important to learn how. And so, for instance, in philosophy, we need to learn how to make arguments. And the way you learn that, you learn how to do that, is by doing it. And the worry is that the machines are starting to do it for our students. And you also learn from exemplars. You learn from teachers who model how to do things. And that means both, hopefully to give a clear explanation of ideas so the student learns how to do that, but it's also how to relate to the material, why you would care about this, how you approach a question. There's a whole set of skills that are part of what we communicate as teachers that the machines simply can't communicate. They don't have them, or if they have something analogous to a skill, it's completely different. We often don't know how they work, as Jean said earlier. So we think people should be thinking about the skills that students are learning and the impact that AI has on those skills. And often it seems to me that what is happening is people are replacing both opportunities for the students to learn the skill, when the student substitutes AI for their own conscious creative activity, but they're also replacing opportunities for staff to teach the skills, because our students will have less interaction with staff because they will be interacting with machines.
Yeah, and just on that, I mean, the way that AI is kind of marketed to educators, look, there's lots of kind of stuff that is time consuming, and that you don't have your time poor, you don't have time to do it. And so AI will take that tedious work off your hands so that you can do the thing you really love to do, which is teach, right? And engage with students. And we worry that there'll be a slippery slope there where we'll actually be taking away from face-to-face time, right? And that face-to-face time is really important, because in any discipline, you're not just learning the content, but you're learning how to be the kind of person who responsibly uses that knowledge and those skills, right, in the workplace. So in academia, or in a hospital, or in an engineering firm, you have to be able to see yourself as the kind of person who can use those disciplinary skills in a meaningful and responsible way. Absolutely. You have to be able to see how a doctor
That's
conducts
an
themselves.
apprenticeship model, like I always
Absolutely.
use the example of a shoemaker.
Yeah. How does a philosopher conduct themselves? How does a doctor conduct themselves? How does an engineer conduct themselves? And AI can't, even if an AI can give you feedback right away on whether your formula is consistent or not, you need to be able to see it in someone else, to see what it means to use knowledge in a meaningful and human way. And worry AIs can pretty rapidly reduce those opportunities.
Well, I agree with what you said, and I also think that there are some unintended consequences of the use of technology, maybe some consequences that we're not talking about now, no, that we are concerned. And I read 30 years ago a book by Neil Postman called Technopolis, the surrender of culture to technology was called. No? And I was amazed in that book and the opening of that book that he mentions that Socrates was skeptical of the written technology that was starting to be something more prevalent at the time, because he feared students will become lazy because they will not learn by memory, rote memory, the discourses, and also will not learn what are the basic things about philosophical thinking. No, but I think his concerns were maybe in the wrong area at that time, in that particular thing. But we always have to think about what are the unintended consequences of what we do. Our time is up, so I have to ask you a last question. So if I can, and my last question is, what are your strategic recommendations for universities and universities professors, teachers, educators about the use of AI? What are the things that you can say? I will tell you to be careful on this and that.
I have to be very direct here, because I think you need to ask yourself, what are my students learning when they complete this exercise in the way that I'm allowing them to complete the exercise? And I think if they're using AI to read and write, then they are not learning the skills that I think will be absolutely central to the intelligent use of AI in the workplace, as well as to just being a good citizen and a responsible human being. So ask yourself what in fact students are learning from the way that they are doing the task, or I allow them to do the task. Don't be distracted by the quality of the outputs, because that's not what that's not what assessment is about. If a student can, for instance, if a student could write a better essay by getting their friend to do it, no one would think that that was a good way of doing assess. You imagine someone 20 years ago saying, look, hey, if students pay professional essay writers to do the work they write better essays. Let's teach them about using professional essay writers. People wouldn't have bought that, and they shouldn't buy AI for the same reason. What matters is what the skills that the student is practicing, and that's what we should foreground, and we should design our education and our assessment to teach those skills. Gene?
I could not have said that any better. I mean, just and I'd like to end on that note. A very kind of vehement call to arms and to reflection about this new technology. But just concretely, I mean, the AI marking, so that students are writing with machines for machines. I mean, that our argument gives good philosophical reason for why that would be the total breakdown or corrosion of pedagogical relationships, and the whole point of education as such, So just pragmatically, I mean, if you're thinking about getting students' work marked by AI, I mean, the chances then is that students are going to in no way feel any responsibility to take that assessment task seriously.
Well, thank you very much, Jean, for your answer. So I have to contrast this podcast with other interviews that I made. I made also interviews that are very optimistic, overly optimistic. I think the one that was more optimistic, Sebastian Thorne, like a Silicon Valley way of thinking about technology that will solve everything. And I think this is important not to have these different points of view. And I want to thank you for sharing what you think about this. What are the concerns? a critical view from the philosophy point of view, that we need much more humanities to understand what are the risks and the things that we're doing with these kind of technologies and using them everywhere. I enjoyed a lot talking to you, and I hope I can meet you in person very soon, either in Australia, Mexico, or elsewhere. And have
Thanks,
some
Pepe.
Thanks very much.
in.
Yes, can't wait. Thank you very much.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
For more information, visit observatory.tech.mx/EduTrends podcast and ife.tech.mx. A special thanks to Tecnológico de Monterrey, the Institute for the Future of Education, and the Tec Sounds team. EduTrends producers Esteban Venegas and Cristian Igosa. Stay tuned and play Tec Sounds in your favorite podcast app for other great shows and content.